audio by Raising Free People Network.
I'm Akila S. Richards, grief literacy educator, longtime podcaster, here to explore what we lose individually and collectively when we fail to name grief as part of our everyday life. Grief isn't just about death, it's about endings, expired relationships, outgrown roles, identities and dreams we released. If we tend to grief in its diversity, we can expand our capacity to navigate change, to hold space for each other, and to move with more presence in a rapidly shifting world. This is What I Let Die podcast, where we move from grief struck to grief tending. What happens when we stop avoiding grief? Let's find out together. Hey, you. Welcome back to What I Let Die. Listen, if you're here, you already know that grief is more than what we were taught. That's the premise, that's the fact, that's the experience. And today, I want to use this time to name a type of grief that most of us don't even know how to talk about. If you have not listened to episode 1, where I talk about the foundations of grief and the types of grief, I recommend you start there. That very first one was really meant to offer you housing or walls around the type of discussions that we'll be having here. This is part of a 4-part series, and right now you're listening to the second episode in the foundations element of the series, because I really did not want to make any assumptions about how much you've been exposed to or experienced working with grief. So keep that in mind as you listen to each of the episodes, and start with episode 1 if grief sounds like a big, bad, scary wolf to you, okay? So today I want to talk, as I said, about this type of grief that most of us don't even know how to talk about. So there is a line in Alua Arthur's book, Briefly, Perfectly Human, that stopped me in my tracks. And what I'm going to do is at the end of this episode, I'm going to put a clip from the conversation that I had with the Eyelid Course group, the I Let It Die grief tending caravan that I run from time to time. In that conversation last year, you'll hear me go into great detail, and I'll also read the full quote from Alua's book, brilliant book. Shout out to Natalie Pipkin of Black World Schoolers for gifting me that book. So on page 112 of Briefly, Perfectly Human, Alua says that there should be a name for the many types of, she was essentially talking about spiritual and metaphorical deaths that we experience throughout our lives. And I read that and I was like, yes, a name, because how do you grieve something that you were never taught to see? How do you mourn a version of yourself that no longer exists? How do you honor a dream that didn't die in one big dramatic moment, but it just slowly slipped away? We don't just grieve people. That was Alua's point. We grieve ideas, relationships, roles, expectations, versions of ourselves. And yet we've been taught that if there's no body, no funeral, no moment where people gather to acknowledge the loss, then it wasn't really a death. And that's a lie. And I have a name for it. So again, the full story is going to be at the end of this episode, but let me tell you right quick how this name, Kananápo is the name, how it came to be. Essentially, the word came from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who used, her and her sisters, a lot of words that feel like they've fallen out of the normal usage of Jamaican Patois. It's like old time words. And Mama and her sisters used to use this word, Kananápo, essentially to mean that something they expected to see or hear or experience was not there. It was missing, and it was surprisingly missing, and they were not okay with it. So they would, for example, be like, yeah, Miss Betty say, should I go meet we at 6 o'clock, at the place, and then I reach 6 o'clock, 6:15, 6:20, Kananápo. The time passed, and I did not see her. She did not show up. It did not happen. That's how Mama and her sisters used the word Kananápo. So I didn't invent this word. It actually came through me. It showed up when I needed a way to describe that feeling of a loss that was real but invisible to most people around me. It's a word that says there was a death, but not of a person. So I call that a non-body death. And once I started calling it what it was, once I started saying this was a death, this needs grieving, something shifted. A lot of that work came up for me while I was in seminary. And then when I shifted from seminary to thanatology school to focus on death, dying, bereavement, loss, grief, I was naming and realizing and honoring a lot of the rituals that I had been intuitively doing over the years as I was experiencing non-body deaths. And so this word, Kananápo, is so important because language gives us permission. Language lets us say, yeah, this is real. This shit happened. I need to tend to this. Kananápo. So let's talk about how to recognize Kananápo in your life. How do we start seeing the deaths that we weren't taught to grieve? That's the question I'm feeling into. So bear with me as I do this and invite you to do it as well. One thing that comes up as I really interrogate this is look for the empty spaces. Look for the things you used to hold that aren't there anymore. Identity shifts, for example. Have you ever looked in the mirror and realized that you are not who you used to be? And I'm not talking about just what you look like. I'm talking about how you feel, how you move. Maybe you changed on purpose. Maybe life changed you. Either way, there's a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. That's a death. And for some of us, it's a relevant death because we have been noticing and feeling the untended grief and loss of that version of ourselves, but we didn't name it. I know for me, oh my God, there are so many voice journals that I could share. And probably will share some of those inside the Wild Podcast chat room. And I'll make sure the link to that is on the show notes page. But I know that there are just so many aspects of myself as a longtime entrepreneur, mostly a solopreneur. There are aspects of me, the level of drive and go that I had years ago, the excitement and curiosity that I had about certain levels of entrepreneurship that I just ain't got now. I am tired in a way that I wasn't in my 20s and 30s. I am differently resourced emotionally and energetically. And while this slower version of me is beautiful and welcomed, there are absolutely moments where I mourn not having the type of fire that I had 10, 20 years ago. That's an example of a death. That's an example of something that I intentionally grieved the loss of that. And so when that moment comes up of feeling tired or frustrated or like I'm not sharp in a way that I used to be, it doesn't hit me in the same way. It doesn't feel like a hit. It actually just feels like something to pay attention to and to honor and to allow, and then to watch it fade away as I continue to learn to honor and value my slower, wiser self. but that shift in identity is a type of death. Lost dreams, for example, is something else that comes up as I really interrogate this question of how do we start seeing the deaths that we were not taught to grieve. Lost dreams. The dreams you had for your career, your family, your life. What happens when it doesn't work out? What happens when you outgrow someone? Or someone outgrows you? That's a death. Changing relationships, as I talk about outgrowing people, right? When a friendship slowly fades, when family dynamics shift, when someone you love is still alive, but no longer accessible to you in the way that they once were, that's a death. And here's the thing, just because something needed to end doesn't mean it won't hurt. And it doesn't mean that that hurt won't linger. Even the ending of a relationship or a job cycle or whatever, even when that death needed to happen, it's healthier, it's safer, it's for the best. Pain and the opportunity to grieve can still exist. So I want you to play with saying, writing, imagining, feeling into this term Kananápo. Kananápo. As you move through the parts of you and maybe the parts of people around you. As a parent, I think about the type of Kananápo that my children experience over time. We grew up with our children. We raised each other as unschoolers. And I know that I've heard my daughters speak to Kananápo in terms of ideas they had about school and some of the things that they feel they missed by not being conventional students, some of the social elements, ease of access to other people all the time, some of the things that felt for them like benefits of school that they missed. That's an example of Kananápo. No person died, but ideas about friendships and things that were normal for them socially or normal for other people in their age group, but not for them, that is a type of Kananápo. And so for you, what are those? For people you love and care about, what type of Kananápo might they be experiencing that now that you have a name for it, you might be able to offer a little grace, a little space, a little understanding for what they might be processing. And as I move through this, I feel like maybe it's important to talk about something that lives right next to Kananápo. Maybe it's its bestie, and that is anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief, which I think I touched on in episode 1, is grieving something before it's even gone. So I'm experiencing that, for example, now with my other grandmother, the one who is still alive, but in some ways, in many ways, she's fading. That's a type of anticipatory grief. Seeing the writing on the wall in a relationship, knowing that the end is coming. That's a type of anticipatory grief. Feeling the slow shift of an identity you once held close, the fixer, the solver, the person to call upon. Maybe at this age and stage in your life, you just ain't got it for that anymore. You don't want to be the fixer or solver. You know that that's problematic. You understand what that's costing you emotionally and socially. That's a type of anticipatory grief. And we want to believe that we can prepare for loss, right? That we can grieve ahead of time so that it won't hurt as much when it finally happens. I know that's how I feel. That's a part of why I moved over into thanatology, because I thought, oh my God, I need like the longest runway ever around grieving the losses that I'm afraid of, terrified for, right? That's how it started for me. My mother, the eventuality of her death, unexpected deaths that may arise, how someone dies. We know we're all gonna die, but how we die isn't given. So I, perhaps like you, wanted to believe that I could prepare for the loss and kind of start grieving ahead of time so that it won't be as painful when it finally inevitably happens. But that's an illusion. That's an illusion. No amount of getting ready for an ending can make grief disappear. I know this personally. Because grief doesn't work like that. It doesn't ask, are you prepared? Okay, now I'll come. But here's the connection. Naming Kananápo helps us to meet the grief sooner. When we start to see non-body deaths for what they are, we can tend to them in real time. We can stop pretending and start tending. Oh, yes, we can stop pretending that we're fine and start tending to the grief while we're still in the process of letting go. This is what I have been doing and feeling into, not just in relationship to my grandmother, who's an elder, who I know will die, but all the other types of death that I don't know when and how they will happen. And so here's why language matters in grief. Yeah, the way I see it, language is such a significant aspect of grief because the words we use shape how we process things, including loss, right? The words that we use shape how we process loss. If I don't have a word for what I'm experiencing, or not even if, get even stronger than an if, in the experiences that I've had, when I didn't have a word for what I was experiencing, I tended to label it as just stress, or would be labeled as me being emotional, and I might be the person doing the labeling or somebody else, or not handling change well, or my ADHD brain, or my perimenopausal brain. I will try to lump it into a category. But if I name it for what it is, when it's grief, I give myself permission to treat it and to treat it differently than I would if it was one of the other things. Right? So this is why naming Kananápo is so important, because when we don't have language for something, oftentimes that means we don't know how to hold it. We don't ask for help. We don't make space for it. We try to push through it, ignore it, downplay it. And that's how grief morphs from this natural, healthy response to loss. It goes from savoring loss to festering. We're going to talk in another episode about the difference between grief and depression. And this is a part of how that happens, not having a name for it, not having practices, rituals to actually be able to treat, not heal, treat your grief. This is why naming Kananápo, these non-body deaths, is so important, because there isn't current language around death and loss that isn't about a physical body. So when we experience these other types of grief and loss, we don't know how to hold it. We don't ask for help, all of that. So I want you to take a moment and think about this. This is my question for you. What's something you've lost that you never named as grief? I mean, it could be as deep as a version of yourself. I remember when I used to da-da-da-da-da with ease. And now I miss that version of me. I miss her. I miss him. I miss them. Maybe it's a friendship that you lost, but you never named it as grief. A belief system. Because grief ignored is grief that keeps echoing. Becomes one of our primary influencers, and we don't even know it. So, what's something you've lost that you never named as grief? And if you take on this practice, know that it ain't gotta be like some dramatic, like, oh my God, all this time I've been, it can be as simple as doing a type of personal archiving, a kind of like inner cleansing, right? Just going through the parts of yourself that you now have some language and some practice to be with, and just tending to that part of the self. It might be a gentle, subtle feeling, or it might be, wow, holy shit, oh my God, I'm really noticing something about the pattern of my choices. And it feels like realizing this might allow me to make different choices because I see what I was doing. I see why I was doing that. I didn't realize that I was grieving it. Any and all of that is a possibility here. So take your time. If you actually move through any of these practices that I share here on What I Let Die, I would love to know how it went for you. I blog over on radicalselfie.org, and you can become a member there. Free and paid membership options are available. And I do a short post after each episode. So if you do a practice from an episode, you can always comment there and I see it. It comes directly to my email and I'm going to respond because this is part of why I'm doing this podcast. I want other people in the mix of the type of practices that I'm really leaning into and relying on as I stay really present to the times we are in and what is important to me and what I want to be part of and what I'm not going to mess with and everything in between. So come on over and share what's happening for you in your grief tending. So that is essentially what we're talking about in this episode. This is why we do this work, because once you name grief, you can tend to it. And when you tend to grief, it moves differently through you. It impacts you differently. So this is why having the language, practicing saying the word Kananápo, writing that in your journal as you are having an experience that you recognize as a form of grief, or you suspect might be a form of grief. This is why it can be helpful. Kananápo, Kananápo. Some things die, period. It isn't about this tidy narrative of the circle of life and death and why the death is in service of something different or better or whatever. We got to get skilled at facing the diversity of deaths. Join me next episode, next week, for grief versus trauma versus depression. How do you know the difference? All right. So I'm going to break down how grief interacts with mental health. Again, pulling from the education that I've learned as I studied thanatology, grief, loss, bereavement, as I've been volunteering in hospice and palliative care and working with aging populations, right? So dealing with some of the mental, physical, social, emotional needs in those spaces and sharing that through this series, essentially. So next week, we'll be on the third episode in part 1 of this 4-part series. Part 1 is the foundations of grief and non-body death. Part 2 is about personal grief. Part 3, grief in community. And part 4 tools and practices in detail. And before we part ways, think about the question I asked earlier. What's something you've lost that you never gave yourself permission to grieve? Write about it, talk about it, because loss, once named, can be tended to. A clip from the conversation that I had with the grief tending caravan last year. You'll hear me go into great detail, and I'll also read the full quote from Alua's book, Briefly Perfectly Human. One of the many books that I've been gifted lately around death and dying in a variety of forms is Briefly Perfectly Human. Making an Authentic Life by Getting Real About the End is the subtitle. She says on page 112, there must be a word for the grief we experience over the life we thought we should have, the events that never happened, stories that didn't have the happy ending. At every point in our path, some possibilities die behind us while others bloom before us. And in every transition, even the joyful ones, there is grief. From maiden to mother, single to married, unemployed to entrepreneur, the old you dies, a new one is born. The grief is ongoing and never ending. I folded the shit out of that page in the book. It really stands out to me, and I love words. I think it's one of the most powerful ways for me personally to sharpen my resistance skills, because I naturally make up words all the time, and I love word smushing. It's portmanteau, I think, is one of the terms that's called. I'm into that. And as somebody whose first language is Jamaican Patois, that's what that is, that blend of Taino, Arawak, and various West African with some elements of British and even some elements of Spanish. All of those things live in how we language out here, and even body language. So when I saw that, when I was reading this book a while back, I was like, there is a word for it. I just haven't said it out loud yet. And so I invited, as I sometimes do, I invite letters to come together to be like, this is what this is. And one of the things that I'm doing is a hospice volunteer training. And I drove to the training last Saturday, and it was a beautiful drive. It's out in the bush in this part of Georgia, like farm, beautiful bush, the sticks. And so I said to Chris, you would like the drive there. It was so nice. So we drove it again the other day, and the word showed up in my head. And I was like, what word is that? And I WhatsApped my mom, asked her about the word, because it's actually my grandmother, my mom's mom. It's actually a word that she uses. And so I messaged my mom to ask her about the context of the word, to see if she understood it the same way that I understood it. And if that's how she saw mama using the word too. And she said, yeah. So the word is Kananápo. Kananápo. And how mama and her sisters use it is like the equivalent of when someone in the US says crickets, right? It's like, yeah, so we were going to be doing this, and then we scheduled a thing, and then crickets. Silence, nothing. I haven't heard anything else of it. So they'll say, yeah, and then we organize and we gather the thing, and then she says she'd go come, Kananápo. Like basically all now I can't see it. Kananápo. And this is the word. Because this is absolutely our approach to little D deaths. We don't even acknowledge it. Crickets, nothing. It's, you get to grieve when the thing is something that we're used to, but all these other things on this journey, Kananápo. So this is the word that really resonates, and I've started to practice it out of my mouth, and it feels, yeah. When a relationship dies, relationships of all kinds, when the friendship that you thought was really here to stay and y'all were really going to move through things together. And then all of a sudden they saying some shit that sound crazy. And you're like, Kananápo. When we have expectations of the type of parent or partner we're going to be, and that our kids are going to really get that and trust us with all the things, and they don't. Kananápo. When that job was supposed to be the very thing that was going to help us do X, Y, and Z, but it's very not for all the reasons, even though you poured all the time and energy and effort into it. Kananápo. So just like I found this word, or it found me, thank you, Mama. I wanted to share it with you and offer it to you. And I know Mama would be happy about that. Kananápo. And also invite you to feel into if there are words or letters that come together, or sounds that come together, that might be a better reflection for you of these other types of death. Because to name something is a powerful experience, and it's one that we can be careful with, because naming something can also make us feel like we own it or have some level of dominion over it. And sometimes it's really about being in relationship with it. It's a type of intimacy when we name something. And that's the space that I'm offering this from, not in the sense of dominion or ownership, and again, or even understanding, but just to have a name when we need a name. Kananápo.
This episode is part of a multi-episode series that serves as a public, free grief literacy project called What I Let Die podcast. The show is co-produced by Akila S. Richards and Kate Umstatter Thompson. Show art by Chris Richards. Much of the content comes from or is inspired by Akila's Grief Tenders course, called the Eyelid Course, an acronym for I Let It Die. Show notes and resources are available at radicalselfie.org/wild. Share the show with friends, and be sure to rate the show wherever you listen to it.